Well, good morning. It's now 11:30. We're going to go ahead and kick off the pre-commission agenda. I'm going to start off with my report. I'll keep it pretty brief. I just wanted to commend our staff and Director Wong. As a result of last week's testimony about the access management policy, we've had a chat internally about how can we make sure that we keep all of our committees apprised of various topics. What is the policy, standard policy schedule in terms of how we approach policy, who gets informed, all of those types of things. So we're going to be working on an internal process for how we approach that, and we'll be sharing that when it's finalized and ready to go. And then one quick suggestion that Director Wong had was to send out upcoming meeting topics to all the chairs of the committee members, and we think that's a great low-hanging fruit next step piece to keep all the chairs apprised of what's happening so that they can then react accordingly in terms of organizing their meetings and working with staff to have presentations on topics that the commission is going to be speaking on, and or have plenty of time to organize their thoughts to approach the commission with their feedback or recommendations on not just policy topics, but anything that we're talking about. So I think that's the short-term, smaller fixes that are going to be coming here soon. And I just want to thank everyone that showed up, the emails, the folks that testified, and subsequent other folks that reached out as a result of last week's agenda topics. So that's it for me. Any questions from the commission? Okay.
I have a couple things.
Commissioner Hanson.
I always have a couple things. First, it just breaks my heart to see another fatality. The fatality on Cloverdale and Ustick is just completely, to me, completely avoidable. And when I went out there and looked, I thought, there's nothing but 5 lanes, both of those, very wide, unused bike lanes, and an unused middle turn lane. And I think part of the temptation to speed and far exceed the speed limit and take those turns without looking to see who's in the crossings are all these unused turn lanes. And I think we need to, part of what our evaluation needs to be on some of these arterials as we're doing safer multi-use paths is to get rid of unnecessary turn lane or space where we have a continuous turn lane. And it is just a continuous turn lane. And on that point, I just want to commend staff and especially Colby Jaderos, his TELUS response to the fact that after evaluating on Boise Avenue, much smaller road, but nonetheless we have a continuous turn lane and there's a segment we don't need. And it just isn't justified, and it's going to be a lot safer. There is a place where we recognize it's unnecessary. And so, first of all, I thought his TELUS response was superb and really good and hit all the right points and helped explain why it is we're doing what we're doing. And so I'd just like to move us in the direction of evaluating more of these. How, I'm not sure, but I think this will also contribute to drivers recognizing they just have their lane to travel in, and that they have to slow down as they make these turns from one arterial to the other. So I think that's really important. So those are the 2 items I wanted to raise.
Madam President.
Commissioner Goldthorpe.
Yes, just along that same line, I don't think we've had reports on virtually any of the fatalities or injury collisions to pedestrians or bicyclists this year, maybe 2 or 3, but there's been way too many. And so I think that when we state something publicly about there being a problem with road design, this, that, or the other, as we just heard, that's premature, probably out of line, and unnecessary at this particular point. My opinion only.
Well, I would just like to share that, looking back at what data that the city of Boise presented us around where are those fatalities and high injury crashes, it was really clear there's some common denominators, and that was Fairview was by and large the most conflict-ridden and dangerous roadway, and that even was more so than Fairview, right? Or excuse me, State Street. And of course, Ustick isn't that far behind. And I think just looking at the data and the street design and the common threads that are there, a lot of the pieces that Commissioner Hansen mentioned are true. There's a lot of unused space, 5 lanes of travel, conflicts, access management issues, all of those things, right, contribute to the high rates of crashes and deaths, which also happen to be in my district. So I don't think that that's a coincidence by any means. So appreciate your thoughts about obviously staying above the fray and producing and sharing accurate information. But we do have a consistent theme with some of our road designs being unsafe. Okay, any other general issues the commission would like to bring up at this time? Any questions about the agenda? Okay, Director Wong.
Well, Madam President, Commissioners, good morning. Great to see you all. Couple topics for your consideration today. First off, I'd like to remind you that we have the ITD joint meeting this Friday at 12:30 here. The agenda has been posted across the board, and I think it's going to be a very, very good session. On 19 June, I'd like to remind you all that we will be closed celebrating Juneteenth, and I'd like to thank the Commission again for supporting that for the entire staff. On the 22nd of June, we have a joint meeting with Boise at 9 o'clock here. And so far, the proposed ACHD topics are as follows. Chip seal update, since we're doing it all in Boise. Update on the State Street projects, the 3 of them. Update leading pedestrian interval update. And the Emerald Bridge ACHD ITD Boise proposed initiative. A little bit more on that here later today. And I'm waiting for Boise's review and their recommendations moving forward. As soon as I get them, I'll share them with all of you. I've also suggested to Boise that CCDC provide both ACHD and Boise an update status on CCDC's 5th and 6th Street project. I think it'd be very informational for Council and the Commission to see just exactly where CCDC is at this point. I expect to hear back from that later today or tomorrow, so whether or not they'll be able to do that. On June 29th is May in Motion. Again, as I shared, a tremendous motivational speaker, and it's going to be a very, very successful event. As we get closer, we'll make sure you have all the details for your consideration. On June 29th, we have the ACHD Family Fun Day at Clannad Park. You're all invited, of course, to attend. And then as a long range on July 7th, that's the groundbreaking for ACHD's new traffic center on Franklin. More you all as that comes forward. Commissioner Pickering, we will have proposed comments for you and such as we go forward. Commissioners, I recently learned that the Idaho Association of Highway Districts has requested a letter of intent from ACHD to rejoin the association. I think this is great. And unless you have any concerns, I would like to author that draft quickly and send it out to you to see what I'm going to say. Have that out to them by next week and such. It's been a long time coming, and I think it's very beneficial to the district and to the Idaho Association of Highway Districts to, again, speak as one voice when it comes down to this legislature. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thanks, Director. I think that's a great idea, and I want to thank Commissioner Goldthorpe for having conversations to help spur that initiation.
Last week, Commissioners, several members of the executive and I visited the Children's Museum in Meridian at their request. Very impressive, very informative. We learned a lot about the great work that they're doing there. One of the things we learned about, they'll be starting to expand very, very soon. Part of that expansion is going to be an auto truck interactive section for kids 1 to 9 to experiment with. And so they asked us to consider if there are a couple things that we might be able to support at the Ada County Highway District to this operation. And right off the bat, we believe we're able to donate a whole variety of signs, maybe miniature ones, showing all the different traffic delays, that sort of thing. Maybe some vehicle parts, an engine, a dash to move forward, and maybe a potential video display of some sorts to see if the 9-year-old can get through a roundabout with the new. We will keep you posted, but I will be talking to ITD and to the Truckers Association to see if there's some things they might be able to produce to help this this great group of folks that are doing some great things out there. So we'll keep you posted on that going forward. So commissioners, last week I shared with you an initiative, and that was to do an interim adjustment to ACHD's traffic calming policy. As you recall, I briefed that my intent is to remove the cut-through requirement for neighborhood traffic calming considerations. As a reminder, ACHD's currently requires 3 milestones to meet for neighbors requiring traffic calming: speed, volume, and cut-through assessments by petition. As the director's report, as you notice on the agenda, has been noticed as an action item, I request this morning that the commission approve an interim policy waiver to remove the cut-through aspect and to provide the staff the authority to approve traffic calming mediations at the lowest responsible level if a street meets either speed or volume, not both. And that if this is met, ACHD will then pay for the installation of speed humps and speed bumps, not the residents of the neighborhood. I am confident this is completely in line with our 2023 focus of accelerating innovation or lose, pushing down the lowest decision-making authority to the lowest appropriate level, and streamlines the process and removes the cut-through criteria that, quite frankly, does not, and this is in my opinion, make sense, or is something that is an objective criteria. Commissioners, I'd ask for your support, and if approved, we will implement this today and work this into the next update of the appropriate policy review for your consideration.
Madam President,
Commissioner Goldthorpe.
would it be appropriate to make that motion now?
Sure.
Okay, then I will. I'd like to make a motion to approve what the director just explained with regards to eliminating cut-through traffic and allowing our staff to mitigate the speed problems by using either speed bumps, I mean the speed or the volume of traffic as the director has explained.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any discussion?
Yeah.
Commissioner Hanson?
I think that's great, and I'm really glad that the next set of policies that we're going to dig deep into is around speed management, so that the policy language can reflect what the waiver we just approved or we will approve, I think. I think it's really important that we continue looking at that. And I would ask that as part of this, we also just get a map. I don't know where I hear about them from my own side of town, but just a mapping of where the requests are for speed management are coming. So that if they're concentrated in certain areas and not in other areas, we can do part of that as part of the evaluation. So, you know, Mr. Wasson on our staff has a lot of requests that come in. So to the extent we can map them pretty quick and just identify where these requests are coming in, I think it'll help in our evaluation, and I look forward to incorporating these and hopefully additional changes into the language of our policy.
My only question, yeah, I would agree with everything Commissioner Hanson shared, and I think this is a great first step in then overhauling the entire policy potentially. And I mentioned to Director Wong that I would really also like to, as a result of this waiver being passed, have some sort of tracking to see how many programs or projects that actually pass through this new adjustment in the policy, and then which ones are still being held up. And I think that that's going to inform what policy direction that we take as a result of that. So I think that's an important piece because we want to make informed decisions about what parts of the policy aren't working even with this waiver in place. And I would reinforce the note about the map. I think that's a really key component to all of this. Any other, Commissioner Goldthorpe?
One last thing, and that is directed to the drivers in this county. If they paid any attention at all to how fast they were going or who was walking or biking on the side of the street, this wouldn't have been necessary.
Commissioner Gold?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. I agree with the points that you and Commissioner Hanson had made. I hear speeding as the number one concern that residents talk to me about, and I know that this is a barrier, and so I think this is a great first step, and I'm happy to support it. Thank you.
Okay, there's no other discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? There you have it. Thanks, Director.
Commissioners, thank you. Commissioners, to continue under the action item designation for this week's Director's Report, I would like to ask for your approval to reconfigure Shoreline in concert with our approved micro seal project. I would ask Ryan Head to brief you on what we're thinking.
Madam President, Commission, for the record, Ryan Head, Deputy Director of Development and Technical Services. Following up on prior conversations, we have another Let's Get There Safely rapid project deployment that we are looking to implement in the very near future, and wanted to daylight this with the Commission. The request is to Shoreline between Fairview and Americana. There's a fairly wide section here that was built to 5 lanes. At the time, it was probably needed, but at this point in time, we're finding that it's not. And so our traffic engineering team has looked at this and is recommending the reduction of this section from 5 lanes to 3 lanes, with the addition of buffered bike lanes in an interim condition. We do have a planned maintenance project coming up in the next few years in this section that we can look at enhancing that further beyond the buffers. But from a strictly rapid deployment, we felt like this was a good opportunity to do this. If that is acceptable from the Commission's perspective, the intent would be to include this in this year's microsil project, and then proceed with the restriping. We are going to also look at delineators in some form, using some of the experience we've had to put something out in the field to test that, including that in the buffer space. As you note here, we don't see that this would have an impact from a level of service perspective for vehicles, but would vastly improve the comfort and conditions for bicyclists and pedestrians. So with that, we look to you for your support in moving forward with that.
Thank you, Ryan. Commissioner Hanson?
Madam President, I would completely agree. Of course, the Shoreline's not arterial, so level of service doesn't really work on that area. The arteria is obviously our Americana, or even that might even be a collector. I don't know. Is Americana an arterial? It splits between 15th and 16th near there. There's a lot of activity that goes on in that. There's the farmers market and the Green Acres food court, and there's just tons of pedestrian and bicycle activity there. And so I'm really glad that that's a really easy, it's like the low-hanging fruit for clarifying the configuration of Shoreline.
And I just want to say, Ryan, I think this is a great idea. We saw a lot of folks comment for this type of request in the integrated 5-year work plan on the map there, the interactive map. And I believe this is like right on the border of our 2 districts, or is it? I think it's in mine.
Commissioner Gold's
No,
district.
I think it's in mine now.
It's downtown.
No, it's mine. So it's mine. I'll tell you that. And so that's why I was like honing in on the integrated 5-year work plan. But basically my point is that, yeah, there was a lot of those requests and it wasn't previously on my radar. And I want to just share how thankful I am for Christy and Ryan and staff for being like, hey, this is how we could make that work, and just solve for a couple of these problems, making these tweaks. So thank you for bringing this to us, and I hope that I think it was probably nearly 10 folks that commented asking for something like this or these particular requests. So I hope that they see the result of it after the chip seal is complete. So thank you, Ryan. Do we need a motion?
Yes.
Madam President, I would move that we approve the rapid response request from staff on Shoreline.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Ryan.
Commissioners, that ends my director's report. I'll stand for any questions if you have them at this time. If not, you've got a couple of minutes.
Thanks, Director. Any questions? Okay, we'll recess until noon. Thank you. All right, it's now 12 o'clock. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Welcome everyone online and in person. Please join us in standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. First order of business is to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Second?
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Next order of business is to adopt the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda are considered routine and are action items unless otherwise noted. The consent agenda is enacted by one motion. There is no separate discussion on items on the consent agenda. If a commissioner or citizen would like, they may request any item be removed from the consent agenda and placed on the regular agenda. If we do not have any of those requests today, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Madam President, I would move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, moving on to the regular agenda, we just have one item on the regular agenda, and that's the Emerald Street, Camelot Drive, Raymond Street bid rejection. It's a request for approval from staff. I've got Matt listed here. Clearly.
Madam President, Commissioners, yes, thank you. As in accordance with the staff report, although a very good project, the financials that came on this were just astronomically out of proportion. So the staff is requesting that the commission reject the bid. Now, that being said, in the last couple of days, I've been having some great discussions with ITD and Boise staff. And we believe we have an opportunity to maybe raise a project from this rejection to completely redo and get it done right, the entire Emerald Street Bridge. This will be a topic of discussion for your joint meeting with IT Friday and your joint meeting with Boise the following. I will tell you this, I've already had those discussions with the appropriate staff members, and everybody is supportive of moving forward in this type of project. I also believe that, again, we'll have to work through this, that the Emerald Street Bridge project most likely will be a good candidate for an ITD grant from the $100 million that the state allocated last year. So the opportunity that unfortunate costs that came in with this on mobility, the sound walls, all these different things that we had to put into this, just makes this not reasonable by any stretch of the imagination at that $3 million point. However, we need to move forward on that initiative to replace and upgrade the entire bridge and infrastructure. And right now, there is support for that. So that's what's in front of you, and we ask that you do reject this bid.
Thanks, Director. Any questions? Commissioner Gold?
Yeah, thanks, Madam President. So what generally might the timeline be for that reconstruction of the entire bridge?
Madam President, Commissioner Gold, we have had those discussions. This would be a major project. So we're talking, 3, 4, 5 years to get all the financing and everything lined up to make that happen. Now that again, it will be a discussion item with ITD and Boise to see if we can make that move a little further. But there are the normal processes that we're going to have to go through for that big a project. That being said, I think it, in my personal opinion, well worth the time, well worth the effort. Let's get it done right as opposed to piecemealing.
Madam President.
Commissioner Gold, do you have another question?
He can.
Okay,
I can
Commissioner
come back to
Gold.
it.
Understanding exactly how much time has already elapsed since we began the Emerald project to make it a reasonable and safe bikeway, and Jim will probably remember that, and how well that was received. And it wasn't until after we were well into the Meridian stretch of that project that it became evident what a problem that the bridge was there over the interstate on Emerald. And remembering exactly how fast we were all able to respond to the Cloverdale Bridge disaster. And assuming that if everything is approved and the money is available, I'm wondering why we couldn't, and if we could, make this project a greater priority because of the history behind it.
Madam President, Commissioner Goldthorpe, again, a great comment, great suggestion. I think that will be a discussion item that if these pieces come together, that the commission, the board, and the leadership in Boise should have as we move forward. But right now, I cannot in good conscience say yes. I just don't know.
Sure, thank you.
Madam President.
Commissioner Gold?
So, what is the deadline then for the commission to make a decision on whether or not to accept or reject the bid is one question. And
Today.
another, okay, and then another would be, are there pieces of the bid that can be refactored to rebid it, and I hear what you're saying about wanting to get the project done correctly. Putting it off many more years is not ideal. And so, and just, we have those upcoming conversations. So is there, depending on how those go, can we recalibrate this bid and put that out again?
Madam President, Commissioner Gold, straight answer, no. We have looked at this, and with the only one bidder that we had in today's environment, I don't see this getting any change, any different. Now, there are options of looking at how things, there might be cost savings. However, those cost savings are this minimal, and they're divided equally between the district and the builders. So we're talking a couple dollars as opposed to millions. So from my perspective, at this point in time, the answer would be no.
No, I think, Commissioner Gold, maybe if I might, how I heard your question was, if, say, these conversations with ITD in the city of Boise, and they don't prove to be fruitful in terms of the timing or the funding or what have you, can we revisit this bid and accept it at a later date?
Madam President, without stepping into the legal areas, you can always relook an issue, but once you reject this bid, it's rejected. And then if at a time we come back and say, we'd like to redo this, sure, we can put that up again and go forward.
Was that kind of your question? Okay. Mm-hmm.
I apologize for not understanding your.
That's okay.
Commissioner Hanson, you have anything?
I just want to, I agree with Commissioner Gold and Goldthorpe's comments that it's important to make this as safe as possible for pedestrians and cyclists trying to get through that gap. And I think there are things we could probably do to make that as safe as possible, mostly in the way we manage the automobile traffic coming over and turning onto and off of. I agree this bid doesn't seem to make sense, and I'd support rejecting the bid, but I'd like to see this move forward at like Commissioner Goldthorpe said, at a faster pace. I think there's resources out there, not just with ITD's funds, but with equity funds that are available on the federal level. This is the only connection between, the connector does divide those neighborhoods, and so this is such a critical connection. And I think there's opportunities to get those resources, and we ought to move. We probably can't move as fast as we could on Cloverdale, but certainly a lot faster than we would normally do for a major capital project that might take 5 or 6 years. So I'd like to see us prioritize that because this is the key pedestrian and bike link east and west along a corridor we've already designated. And I would like to see resources from the feds coming in to help that. And who knows, maybe the city. And it's also the neighborhood. I would just want to point, the neighborhood is prioritized linking those two parts of the neighborhood.
Thanks, commissioners. I would just like to, for those that are listening in online or in the audience that may not understand the dynamics. But this bid, it was and this project, right, it was not going to be able to completely improve the entire length and segment of that bridge because we do not have jurisdiction over the section that is directly above the connector. So I think I would agree with Commissioner Hanson and Commissioner Goldthorpe, like this bridge desperately needs to be completely overhauled, in my opinion. And this was one way that we explored making it, incrementally better, but not perfect. But I think for that price of a bid, and we would still have this gap essentially of lack of protection. I'm hopeful that with expedited and, enthusiasm and extreme urgency, we can get this done a little bit quicker with a better end result, which would make the whole bridge be redone and it would be safer for everybody. So I think I'm in support of rejecting the bid for those reasons, but I think ultimately if we do not see some urgency and support from our other partners, I think we need to go back to our previous course of action.
And Madam President,
Commissioner
just a
Hanson.
question, can we do something like on the rapid request? I'd like to make, Clancy Anderson submitted something, if that could be part of the record, which it probably already is. Because
It
it's
is.
submitted.
Thank you.
Because that really has to do with the visibility of people using that bridge as a pedestrian or a cyclist to drivers who are coming over it. And we can do something in the interim to make sure that visibility or slow the traffic down so that the safety on either end, especially on the St. Luke's, the St. Al's end of it, where people then are accelerating down and there's a number of driveways and roads that are turning into it. So just, if we could do something to make that in the interim much safer, because it's still going to be used, it has to be used, it's a critical commuter route for people cycling east and west. So to make that safer so that we can avoid those kind of risks would be really good. And this might be a rapid request, rapid, what are they called? Rapid implementation, to not so much with drivers enter and proceed on that segment, that it's a high priority bicycle and pedestrian link.
Madam President, Commissioner Hanson, yes, I think that, again, as we daylight this with the two joint meetings, and we've already done it with the staff, I think those are great topics to energize all the parties that when we put together the Tiger team to start moving toward that process. There's an interim solution, there's a next step solution, then there's a final solution going forward. And if we can put those all together, I think that's a great idea. But again, I think great topic for discussion amongst the leadership at ACHD and of course Boise and ITD. It's on their agenda.
Director. I mean, and just this weekend, I was talking to someone that I had never met before, and they were saying how the bridge is the scariest piece of anything that they've been across as a bicyclist. So it's definitely a massive gap, and we know this, but I think it is not going to let up, and it shouldn't, until we find a solution and we improve that bridge. So, all right. Is there a motion?
Do we have anybody from the public wants to?
Oh, yes. Do we have to? Public hearing though. Ken?
Oh, okay. Then I'll be happy to make a motion.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay,
Commissioner Goldberg.
I would move that we accept the request for the approval for the bid rejection on the Emerald Camelot Raymond Street project.
And Madam President, I would second that with if we could add and direct staff to develop some interim steps to enhance safety in that segment while we're working towards a longer term solution. If you don't have a problem with that.
No, I don't.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any other discussion? Thank you, staff. All right, all those in
Aye.
favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. All right, moving into public communications. Does any member of the public wish to address the commission at this time? All right, there being no further business before the commission, the meeting is adjourned. All right, so moving into our post-commission agenda, we've got 4 different items today. The first one being a presentation from VRT. Welcome, Ms. Elaine Clegg.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
We're happy you're here.
We are too. And I think they're going to bring up a presentation. In the meantime, let me say that Emerald is the route that I've been riding to Meridian. And I appreciate your efforts to do whatever you can in the interim before this bridge gets rebuilt, and to rebuild it as quickly as you can. I would offer to ride with anyone, including your staff, and point out a couple of things I've observed on the route, including places where the bike route on one side of the intersection is over here and then just disappears for 60 or 80 feet after you cross the intersection, with all the turning cars from the intersecting roadway. Probably one of the places, other than the bridge, I feel least safe. So really appreciate your actions to do whatever you can. All right, are we ready? Well, thank you for inviting us here today. We are here to talk about our annual funding request that we come to all of our partners and ask as a subdivision without taxing authority of our own. You know that we are dependent on contributions from our partners to be able to run our operations. Go ahead. Whoops. Oh, do I have I'm sorry. Yeah, there we go. So today we'll be talking about a couple of things. Typically our annual funding request would just be for the regional operations, but this year we have an additional piece to that, which was negotiated as part of the RAISE grant, and your local contribution to a portion of that grant that will cover 2 intersections that have a lot of bike ped infrastructure as well as other things. So we'll be advancing the State Street vision with this. We'll be bringing more federal funds to the corridor, connecting with the request that we made last summer, and we're awarded with a RAISE grant. We still need to refine some of the project elements. We'll talk about that, and talk about all of the improvements that are planned for these 2 intersections. So first, a review of our funding development process. So we have a general assessment that's calculated as a share of our overhead costs. Your assessment in the past has been a little bit less than that, but has been increasing every year along with everyone else. This year is a little bit bigger increase because of the increase in inflation and the increased costs that have gone along with that, but not a lot. The cost allocation process looks at general assessments, service assessments, capital assessments, and special assessments. In your case, the special assessment is the other place that we'd be asking for funding, as you don't participate in either the service, general, capital, M&O. So moving on. So the request this year is $69,16 in the general assessment and $239,000 in the special assessment, as was negotiated during the RAISE grant process that we went through. So the components of the RAISE grant are many. It includes accessible bus stops in places where they're not very accessible today, en route charging so that as we electrify, we can expand the route distance on some of these routes. Ticket vending machines, we're actually rethinking that, but most importantly, off-board fare collection and figuring out ways for people to use the bus more easily and board the bus more quickly. Real-time bus arrival information, best-in-class amenities at these stops with better shelters and trash and bike racks and lighting and so forth. And then the elements that you all are particularly interested in, a buffered multi-use pathway along many of the sections of this corridor, wheelchair ramps and access at places where those don't exist today, safer bicycle crossings, and additional street crossings for both bicycles and pedestrians. The RAISE grant final design and equipment will include sidewalks, curb cuts, pedestrian crossings, and those transit improvements I just talked about, and we're in the final phase on the intersections at 23rd and 27th, which is the two that would be addressed with this request this year. The total RAISE grant is $10.5 million, and your portion of it at $239,000. I think a pretty good deal. We think it is. So there's 4 local partners. City of Boise is the biggest local partner and the biggest contributor. ITD is also contributing a fair amount, especially at the west end of the corridor. Your contribution, which will particularly help with those bicycle pedestrian amenities. And then CCDC, who's also participating as this is one of their new districts. Each partner's share was based on their role relative to the activities in the RAISE grant, and ACHD wrote a letter of support committing to the up to $239,000 based on the total project cost of the improvements at 23rd and 27th. And those would be the funding that we'd be asking you to make sure and set aside in your budget this year to make available as this project moves forward. So this begins to show some of the improvements that will happen at these two intersections. At 23rd, right now the stop is not very accessible, not very safe. This one requires a fair amount of work moving and replacing those masts. These are stoplight masts that were originally put in place by ITD over 40 years ago, and so we'll be completely replacing those for both the light and the crosswalk. We'll be creating much safer bike and pedestrian crossing at both legs of the intersection. We'll be creating a connection back into the neighborhood. Right now, that landscape strip really prohibits movement from the frontage road onto State Street so that you can either board the bus or get on the bike facilities. So there's significant improvements for both bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure that, of course, support your efforts to improve safety for those two vulnerable users. And it also connects State Street on both sides with those lower stress networks that connect to State Street on both sides. Right now, it's pretty hard to get to State Street or across State Street from those lower stress pieces of the network. At 27th, similarly, a lot of pieces that also support the bicycle pedestrian connections. Right now, the bus stop is well back from the intersection. The bus pulls over and people have to cross a piece of that frontage road and then cross onto the island where they board the bus. There is no safe connection for bicyclists at that point, and so what this will do is take the end of that frontage road, continue that as a bike facility, get it across 26th, and then continue it on either the sidewalk or onto those connecting lower stress streets. It'll also rebuild the platform itself, where many of these are regular curb height, and we are raising many of them. If you've seen the platforms on Fairview Avenue, for instance, to what we call near level boarding. All of our new buses have feature that allows them to kneel to the height of the platform if it's 10 inches or higher. And so these platforms will be built to that kind of height. That'll make it much safer and easier and quicker to load and unload and board passengers. And then the transition, of course, on the bike facilities that I mentioned, I think are tremendously important at this intersection. So for those things, the funding request is pretty simple. The general assessment at 6,900, the special assessment, we're asking you to set it aside in your 2024 budget. The general assessment will be billed immediately following the change to the new funding year. The other will not be billed until we work out the final details. We'll work with your staff, and it will be billed in increments based on the final design and the actual costs of the infrastructure as it's being built. So we would follow then with a cooperative agreement that would memorialize all of this, if you agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. Commissioners, any questions? Commissioner Hanson?
I just appreciate that. I know we had this whole discussion pretty much already agreed to this last year, but I know it's the new budget year we have to do it for. But my main question is, are you going to introduce us to your colleague?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I meant to do that early on. Thank you for reminding me. Our new staff person in the planning department who does all of our cost allocation work is Kyle Street, and Kyle can answer any of those detailed questions on the cost allocation. Kyle prepared this presentation and helped me prepare for it, and thank you for asking.
Thank you. Welcome,
We
Kyle.
wanted to make sure that we presented all of this information because I knew, Miranda, of course, was not here when this was agreed upon, and also members of the audience might not be familiar with all the things. Sorry, Kyle.
I thank you for being here. I think that makes total sense, and looking forward to the agreement that lines out as the design develops, paying for our portions that connect to those vulnerable users, like you mentioned. I thought you did a great job explaining our role and the whole point of this collaboration. And I just am so proud as a freshman commissioner, not freshman, I can't say I'm a freshman anymore, sorry. Your Gold's the freshman now. I'm very disappointed when I first joined the commission, when we just only paid $7,000 and change, and I'm just so proud and excited to support and together in this amazing grant opportunity, and hopefully make some massive improvements along State Street. So I'm just very gleeful in being able to support this, and it's a long time coming.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, and I'll just mention, since you bring that up, that we are looking into ways to bring even more money to State Street. There's a program that we could potentially use to cover all of the local match that might be needed on a new raise grant or other discretionary grant where we have to have local match. And we've invited your staff to a webinar on June 27th to explore that. It's a bond funding program out of the Federal Infrastructure Bank that's never been used in this region, but one that we think is really ripe on the State Street corridor, and gives us the opportunity to maybe think bigger than we've been able to, because the local match is always such a difficult hurdle to get over for all of us. So thank you for bringing that up.
No, thanks, Lane. I think anytime that we can align, our vision, our projects, and our funding, I think we're going to be better off in terms of serving the same constituents that we're all trying to, serve, and have better infrastructure as a result of that. So thank you for continuing to push us in that direction.
Well, and it's perfect timing as the Y construction goes forward. We're talking to them about actually trying to really help their patrons use the bus on State Street as parking is taken over by construction and it's not available for them anymore. So we're looking forward to having even more patrons on our State Street route, and so this is perfect timing for that.
Thanks, Elaine.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kyle. All right, so the next presentation is on planned communities. Welcome, Ms. Christy Little.
Thank you, Madam President, Commissioners. For the record, Christy Little, Development Services Manager. Commissioner Pickering, President Pickering actually requested that staff present some information on planned communities. So today we're going to go over what they are, where they are, and what ACHD's role is in the process.
And before you move on, Christy, Ken, we're not seeing it on our side of things. Beautiful, thank you.
All right, so we'll start with what is a planned community. So this is the definition from Ada County. I'll just read that first paragraph. That communities that are served with urban infrastructure and are intended to function independently by providing a variety of housing options, schools, community centers, parks, trails, and supporting commercial services. So in Ada County, in areas not within city areas impact, we have 4 formal planned communities. Back in the 90s, Hidden Springs, followed by Avamore, Cartwright Ranch, and in more recent years, Dry Creek Ranch. So you can see here the total number of acreage and dwelling units approved, up in the 4,000 range just with these 4. So that, I want to talk about just what the words mean, right? So we interchangeably use planned community, specific area plans, and master plans, and really it's just based on where the application is happening. So if you're in Ada County, it's a planned community. If you're developing the same project but within a city's area of impact or within the city, the most common terminology used in our area is a specific area plan or a master plan. So generally speaking, it's the same. It's a process where an applicant can propose zoning code and a master plan for an area that is different than the city's current adopted zoning code. And then if approved, the specific area plan or master plan becomes the base zoning for that project or that property. So in Northwest Ada County, Spring Valley, which the commission is familiar with, and then the Willowbrook development and Star. Those are 2 specific area plans. In the more urban areas, or more urban setting, we have Harris Ranch, which was the first area plan in Boise. We have the Barber Valley specific area plan and the Syringa Valley specific area plan. Syringa is the big blue dot out there past the airport. And then in Kuna, we have the Falcon Crest development. Not shown on this map, but Garden City has the under consideration currently the residents at River Club or the Plantation, and previously approved 34th Street area plan. So these are just some examples of specific area plans that are existing within our county today. And then Boise also has master plans, so they're similar to the specific area plans, but more high level. And the best examples we have are there's the Boise State University master plan and the St. Luke's master plan for downtown Boise.
Christy, I have a question. So go back. So it seems like there's, obviously development has occurred and, Harris Ranch and Barber Valley aren't as, isolated as they once were. But how do you distinguish, and do we distinguish between master plans that are actually within city limits versus ones that are outside of city limits or in the area of impact potentially?
President Pickering, we'll get to our process here in just a minute, but it's the same regardless of location. And then beyond the title of specific area plan or master plan, The city of Meridian, for example, doesn't have those designations, but we see plenty of large subdivisions that come in that are the same size of or exceeding some specific area plans. So here's an example that the commission approved a couple of years ago. On the left, the color designations, you can see that the developer came in and requested a very large annexation and rezone into the city of Meridian. That was then later followed up by multiple preliminary plat applications. I'll go to the next slide. And from one of those preliminary plat applications then is a smaller final plat. So again, starts big, develops incrementally, but not all cities use that term specific area plan or planned community. So I don't want to overlook just the subdivision process itself. So we're going to go through how this process works, the high levels, starting with plan development, whether you call it a planned community or specific area plan or a large subdivision. ACHD provides comments. From there, the development starts off with individual preliminary plats where ACHD sets conditions. And then from those individual preliminary plats, there's the final plat, which is the administrative approval. So ACHD's role, part of this slide didn't show up, but that's okay. ACHD's role, first step, is making recommendations to the land use agency when we receive an application for just an annexation and rezone or a specific area plan, master plan, or planned community. So the land use agency transmits that application to us. The developer submits a traffic impact study to ACHD, and we utilize data from that traffic impact study along with our master street map, our CIP, and our integrated 5-year work plan, along with our development policies to provide feedback to land use agencies. And we recommend improvements, again, high level, that are based on phasing of the development. And then the county or the cities use our feedback to help them form conditions related to the annexation and rezone, maybe a development agreement, or specific to the planned community. So with the very first application, ACHD is providing information and high-level recommendations to the land use agency.
Christy, can you provide some examples of what that actually is?
Sure. Let me think. The more recent Spring Valley application in Eagle Foothills, and I believe they're proposing some roadways over BLM roads. And so we were letting the city of Eagle know that in order for ACHD to accept those roads as public roads, they're going to need to get BLM involved and dedicate those improvements. Oftentimes the cities are really interested in what are the long-term needs of the transportation system. So from the data in the traffic impact study, it might mean that after they've developed 500 lots, that they need to improve a nearby arterial intersection. Maybe they need to add a turn lane. Maybe at 1,000 lots, they need to do something further off-site. This is all predicated on the assumptions based in the traffic impact study. We also, depending on the level of detail in the planned community, we'll talk about if we see some glaring issues. Connectivity is a big one. If we see the need for a connectivity that isn't showing on their plan, we'll provide comments to make sure that as the project develops and as the land use agency sets those high-level conditions, that those things are considered. And that's important for all parties up front to be aware of either concerns or needs as the development grows out. Does that answer your question? Okay. And then preliminary plats, what I've listed here is just straight out of statute that ACHD does have statutory authority to review and approve and place conditions on preliminary plats. So now we're into the setting conditions phase. So different than the overall annexation and rezone or planned community. Now we're getting into the nitty gritty of our development policy, and recommendations and needs for mitigation, either identified by our agency or within the traffic impact study. So for us, typically we're looking at, it's what I've just talked about, but it's what are the impacts to the streets? What are the estimated trips? What are mitigation, or what mitigation strategies, if needed, need to be conditioned? What are the frontage improvements? I've already mentioned stub streets and connectivity. And then I know this has come up, and this is public versus private streets. And I want to spend a little bit of time on this one, and I'll be honest, it's something I've really struggled with here, as we look at some of these larger developments like Harris Ranch and the Avamores that have, I was involved in their initial approvals, and where we decide public versus private streets. I know with Avamore, our staff, when we got that initial application, really pushed back on what's the necessity of having a public street network in this large development. But really, when you compare it to a nearby subdivision that's of somewhat equal size, we weren't asking those same questions. City of Boise, as you know, in their recent conversations with us, they've really been pushing for public streets and not private, regardless of size of development. So what we're looking at as a preliminary plat comes in is the street being designed to meet ACHD standards, and can it be constructed to meet ACHD standards? Harris Ranch and Avamore are both great examples where they've got a lot of development in the foothills, and how does that impact roadway construction and maintenance? You're gonna push that button, Commissioner Goldthorpe?
Christy, can you extrapolate a little bit more on the public necessity piece that you just talked about? Like, what goes into that?
Sure. And again, I'm just going to go back to my experience, and my questioning over the years was always, well, what's the benefit to the public, right? It's this undeveloped piece of property. And so it doesn't matter if it's 1,000 lots or if it's 5 lots. My question is always, what's the benefit to the public? And what we really have to get over is it's not just who's there today. It's who are we serving in the future. And while those people don't live there today, the benefit is to them in the future if the road is constructed to ACHD standards. We have always been instructed, and we as an agency have raised this at multiple times over many years with some of the land use agencies. But in the end, the answer has always been if the road can be constructed to meet our standards, then it is a public benefit, and we will take it into our system, regardless of its location.
Madam President?
Commissioner Gold.
So is this based on subjective criteria, or is there some specific objective criteria that the district uses to inform that?
Madam President, Commissioner Gold, no, that has been that's what our legal team for years, not just the current, that has been their direction to staff and commission. So that's what the subjectivity you're hearing is does that make sense? But there are times when we have to say that's not what we're here for. And what is the public benefit? It's for the future, those future users, and then the connectivity of streets for vehicles, bicycles, pedestrians. So on the outside, it might not look like there's a public benefit, but certainly once the entire system is constructed, there always is.
Madam President,
Commissioner Hanson.
I guess the connectivity seems to be the principal objective criteria for determining it. And the future access of people to public, facility. We run into that in Harris Ranch where there's this sort of, perception of, oh, look at all the public is coming through and using our streets to access the foothills and the river. Well, yeah, that's right. That's why those were made public, because you got foothills and rivers. In fact, they're fairly close together at that point. And that's why we want to make sure that the public has access to public roads. In the meantime, you get to use them to get to your private, facilities. And there's other areas you look at and you think, this subdivision has nothing but cul-de-sacs, and we aren't doing that quite so much nowadays, but in the old days, it's like, it doesn't access anything. But it's a series of little cul-de-sacs that has no public benefit other than just to access those neighborhoods. So I'm assuming that sort of is the balance, because we have to still maintain them, and if they happen to be on the slope, then we have to they get priority on snow removal.
That's correct.
So those are the criteria,
Well, President Pickering, Commissioner Hanson, I mean, that those are some of the benefits of public streets, but not the criteria. The criteria is, can it be designed and constructed to meet ACHD standards? And if the answer is yes, then it's yes.
So I guess I'm a little confused. If it's built to ACHD standards but doesn't connect to anything, are we still obligated then? We feel like, well, it's been built to ACHD standards, so now we're obligated to accept it?
Yep, President Pickering, Commissioner Hanson. That's not the
Okay.
that's not the direction that we've been given. I can think of numerous subdivisions that have been constructed throughout the county, that just based on maybe their rural and large lot nature, one would think, again, at the onset, that they shouldn't be constructed as public streets. But again, our standard, are they designed and constructed to ACHD standards? That is the standard.
That's the criteria.
I don't know about the rest of the commission, but I get quite a few calls from HOAs or individuals in the public asking, if I think we're going to be able to accept their private road into our system. And I tell them basically what you've said. And usually they get pretty discouraged because of what the developer back in the day did not do to build those roads to our standards. And I think I sent a guy over to Ryan Hitt just yesterday to initiate a conversation about that. But anyway, I'm glad you have that standard.
And I will add, commissioners, that, I mean, beyond ACHD, I mean, the public benefit to public streets is access, ease of access of garbage disposal, school buses, deliveries, emergency services. Those are all land use agency issues, but certainly correlate to our policies as well. And
I
then,
mean, I hear your point, Christy, but I see that, I mean, that occurs even on private roads, so I don't connection necessarily.
sure, President Pickering, commissioners, it's just another public benefit. Again, part of that questioning, what is the benefit to the public for construction of a public road versus a private road? And it's knowing that the proper widths are there, the proper turnarounds are there. We always look at it first as, can our vehicles maintain this roadway? Is the turnaround wide enough? Is the street wide enough? But beyond the highway district, those dimensional standards also mean a lot to other agencies as well. And then the final step, I'm going to back up for a minute. So we've got the overall development, whatever it is, planned community or large subdivision. How the developer chooses to phase that development might mean that it comes in as 3 individual preliminary plats, or it might mean that it comes in as 6 individual preliminary plats. We never know. but where we, as an agency, are reviewing those plats individually and setting conditions for all phases associated with that preliminary plat, which could mean, you know, and another 5 to 10 final plats. But whatever it is, the initial conditions set forth always stay with that development from the highway district standpoint. So if we've got a large development and maybe at 500 lots, there's improvement X, and at 1,000 lots, there's improvement Y, our staff is tracking to make sure all of the required mitigation and improvements are constructed when they're needed. So by the time we get to the final plat, really it's just an administrative approval, and we've ensured that the conditions set forth in the preliminary plats that we're allowed to place per statute are incorporated and have been followed. So that's a really high level look, and I'm certainly happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Christy. Commissioners, Commissioner Hanson?
Just an observation, because the area I represent largely is already built out. So I'm seeing, and there's one large lot that's a piece of property, a cementage property, which is now finally turning over. It's an old farm. So, and what frustrates me is our expectation that we're making the developers a lot of money on traffic impact studies, when we know that really it's about mobility impact study. Really, we need to study how people are going to be moving by all modes, not just by cars, which is, it's kind of a waste of money to spend a lot of money saying, well, we have absolutely no plans to change any of these roads surrounding this development, so why make them pay for that study? But how is it connecting to, and maybe that can help say we need to accelerate a safe connectivity for pedestrians or cyclists or ADA facilities offsite because of the impacts of this development. It'll have people using it to go to activity centers nearby. So that's part of the sort of the deal of why we need to. I think my perception is we do far more traffic impact studies than we necessarily need in those, and also sometimes require more parking because it's near an activity center, or it's on a bus line, or it's someplace where we won't need that many vehicle parking. So recognizing the distinctions between those is really important.
Well, President Pickering, Commissioner Hanson, while I don't disagree with everything you've stated there, we are responding to the land use agencies, and they're looking to us to tell them what the impacts are. So this might be a bigger conversation that we want to have with our partner agencies.
Yeah.
In general, though, I think we have to be very careful about lumping all of the traffic impact studies into how you feel about infill development, because we still, the commission doesn't see them all, but you know, we are weekly approving very large subdivisions in Meridian and Kuna, Star, and it is important that we have traffic impact studies. So just food for thought.
And on planned communities, if I could continue, the notion of a planned community is that there'll be activity centers eventually. And I think, you know, I've watched this since the area of Barber Valley had hardly anything. And finally, there's activity centers that are happening. And it's sort of the dynamic of it is that you have to put all the single family houses in first. And then there's sort of, okay, then you can have multifamily housing. And then maybe you can have some commercial development and a school. So all that comes at the end. But the way in which we've measured impacts is based on the assumption, based on the early, all of those are going to be trips in. So your trip to school is going into and out of at the beginning, your trip to the store, your trip to the park or whatever is all sort of like the maximum number of trips. As it gets closer to being filled as a planned community, many of those trips are then captured inside. So actually the trips are no longer generated at the level at which we projected them. So how do we compensate for that? Because they've then had to pay for or been held accountable for facilities leading into and out of. You know, in an ideal world, it'd be the reverse. Those trips would be contained inside So how do we compensate for that? Because we're now at a point where those trips have been captured.
President Pickering, Commissioner Hanson, I mean, just using Harris Ranch as an example, it's taken a lot of years and there's been a lot of background growth that has occurred. So yes, it is. I mean, we hear it all the time. First one in has to pay for whatever improvements are required. You look at Harris Ranch now, and while they may be beginning to capture some of those trips, now they've also become a destination. So it's not that the improvements aren't needed, but it's who builds them. And so far our process seems to be working well. Would it be great if the economy would allow those to develop the other way? Absolutely, but this is the nature of planned communities.
And in general, the planned community is built on bare ground. These are built, well, they tend to be on the outskirts of town until the city comes around them, which then sort of, you know where I am.
Commissioner Gold?
Yeah, I would just like to ask Christy if we could have this PowerPoint presentation emailed to the commission.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Christy, thank you for the presentation. It's really enlightening because there's a lot of aspects, of course, most aspects, you know, are the things that we do are as a direct result or a sequence of the decisions made by cities and our land use partners, right? But what's kind of concerning to me is, generally speaking, you know, these decisions by our land use partners, and if these roads are built to our standards, as you're describing, that creates a ripple effect of impacts and decisions that we as a commission tend to have to make, whether that's, right, a budgetary impact, you know, staffing, especially like we're talking about if they're in the foothills, the equipment that we're gonna have to plow the roads in a snow event, right? And so, and also I think just with those cost pieces as well, that's gonna increase, you know, a burden, which causes us then to have to figure out how to pay for those increases and also communicate to our city and county partners around, well, if you're going to approve this, that's going to impact the amount of projects that we can then work on in your jurisdiction, because we just don't have the tax base or the funding, right, to get to all of their priorities now that they're accepting and wanting to build, you know, a massive development that's not as connected, right? That's further out potentially. So my point is, I totally understand our process, but I think it still leaves the commission in a lurch, and I think the land use partners in fully understanding the impact of these decisions. And I think just the awareness and education is important, right? I understand we can't really change their decision, right? But surely it should inform how they grow, and they're ultimately, because we're going to have to shift gears in terms of these are their road priorities, so we're going to have to make determinations about what does that mean and shift those funds accordingly. So I think ultimately, though, we definitely as a commission need to have a closer connection to the land use partners and just be more aware of these developments in the future, because we're going to have to make some decisions, and we are making decisions as a result of these very large developments coming in. Commissioner Goldthorpe.
Yes, just something I've noticed over the years about, excuse me, about Harris Ranch, and it has to do with the accuracy of the forecasting we do from the traffic studies. They are amazingly accurate, and that's the good news. Sometimes the not quite so good news is that when they have to do repeated traffic studies and they exactly the same thing as the first couple, again, that is an amazing credit to our staff, and maybe a little bit unnecessary. So, but that's really the only thing that I've really seen with regards to the planned communities and our long-term planning about it. And if that's as bad as it gets, I think we're in great shape.
President Pickering, wasn't sure about bringing this up, but I think I will, just because I don't have the memory to back up all of the details that you would probably want. But when Avamore came in as a planned community through Ada County, I know the county's conditions have changed, but they required an economic analysis at that time with their planned community applications. And that analysis included.
And Chrissy, real quick question. So was that a requirement that they imposed on the developer, and do they not do that usually?
I don't think they do that anymore.
Okay.
I think their process has been revised. But at the time, it would be like, instead of submitting a traffic impact study, they were submitting an environmental analysis and an economic analysis and open space analysis. And I remember at the time with Avamore, part of their economic analysis dealt with the roadways, and that analysis demonstrated that the taxes generated by those new, by the new homes and the sustainability of those homes paying taxes in addition to other taxes, that it more than covered their proportionate share of ACHD maintaining those roadways. I remember at the time, Mike Brokaw, whom this auditorium is named after, did a very thorough review of that analysis that was provided and concluded the same. So granted, that was, 15 years ago, but there, that analysis was done at one point. So just food for thought.
If there's no other questions, thank you, Chrissy.
Thank you.
All right, so it's 1 o'clock. Let's just take a 10-minute break really quick, and then we'll reconvene on item number 3. Thank you. we're gonna go ahead and resume our post-commission work session. So the third item is the Franklin Street Neighborhood Improvement Concept Pre-Adoption. Welcome, Edinson.
Thank you, Commission. Good afternoon. My name is Edison Bautista, ACHD Senior Transportation Planner. And for today's presentation, staff wanted to provide an update on the Franklin Street neighborhood improvement as part of the pre-adoption process. This work session is a information briefing only, so no decision is required from the Commission at this time. Staff will be back in front of the Commission on June 28th for adoption consideration. For this presentation, we'll provide an overview of the planning area, go over the purpose and goals, give a summary of the public outreach, and go over the proposed improvements and the next steps moving forward. So on this slide, we wanted to showcase the overview map of the bike corridor. This corridor was identified as part of the Railways to Bikeway Master Plan and is part of the identified regional low stress network. The corridor connects 18th Street, going through Franklin to 4th Street, taking Washington, and then going through the Robin Road and to Reserve Street and reaching to Bruce Ave, where it connects to the Bannock Street in Warren Springs. Following Commission direction, staff and the consultant evaluate the entire corridor following the going once approach. Some of the key destinations along the corridor includes the Boise High School, the Longfellow Elementary School, Fort Boise Park, the Boise Bike Park, bikeways connecting to Boise downtown, and these bikeways including 18th Street, 11th Street, 8th Street, and then we have the Bannock Street bikeway on the east side of the connection. And ultimately also connecting grocery stores like the Albertsons on the west side.
And so, no comment on the bits that you just shared, but I know we're still figuring out our slideshow presentation style. These maps are really hard to read in this type of style and format, so the more that we can zoom in a little bit and have it take over more of the slide, we would really appreciate that. Thanks, Ensign.
Overall, the project goals and objectives include the identification of bicycle and pedestrian improvements that provide lowest experience for all users. These include bicycle facility, sidewalk gaps, sidewalk repairs, curb ramp repairs, intersection improvements, signage, traffic calming measures, and more. The recommendation of intersection and crossing improvement that increase connectivity, accessibility, and safety. Emphasize the presence of Franklin Street Bikeway as a bicycle-friendly corridor and part of the low-stress bicycle network, and identify pedestrian infrastructure to comply with the current standards and the American with Disability Act. As part of this project, we kicked it off with a presentation to our advisory committees, and where we outline the project timeline, we provide an overview of the goals, and overall let them know that this was an ongoing process during the year. We also had stakeholder meetings where the city participated, the city of Boise and school district participated as part of the project team for discussions throughout the project timeframe. During July 2022, public outreach, we released an online tool where we collected input from the community, where the public provided what they liked, disliked regarding the corridor, identify areas of concerns, and suggestions about the corridor. This feedback was used to refine the proposed improvements presented during that public outreach. In addition, in an effort to collect additional feedback from the community, staff attended neighborhood association meetings to present the findings and collect additional input towards the recommended improvements. These meetings were with the East End Neighborhood Association and North End Neighborhood Association. From the public outreach, we received a great majority of support from the public for the proposed improvements that we're presenting in the next couple of slides. one thing that we would like to highlight, Commission, is that as part of the improvements, we look at the level of traffic stress for these corridors. And overall, it's the existing segment, it's a level of stress 1. And with the improvements that we're proposing, we're maintaining that level of stress throughout the length of the bikeway. So starting segment 1 from Franklin Street to Ellis Ave to 4th Street, overall, we're recommending the installation of corridor branding and wayfinding signs, including share lane markings with traffic calming elements. We have, as part of the some intersection improvements, we're looking at ADA improvements. So some example of this are like 15th and 16th Street, where we're doing ADA improvements for the ramps as well as bulb outs. And then we're looking into 13th Street and Franklin, where we're adding has recommended through the neighborhood plans. We're recommending an enhanced crossing, looking at looking into a rectangular rapid flashing beacon, and then looking into 9th Street, ADA improvements and bulb outs and at that intersection. And from guidance from the Commission, certainly with the adoption of the 8th Street study, this project is consistent with what was adopted as part of that concept. After the public outreach, we heard interest of the public to see additional improvements for this segment, and the parking so staff went ahead and did a parking analysis along the corridor to identify what was the utilization of parking along it. And from our findings, we found 57% was for the entire corridor, there was a 57% of utilization, with 61 being the highest during the afternoon. The segment adjacent to the school was identified as a higher utilization with 76%. Staff recognize that this parking utilization varies during the year, especially when school is in session. For segment 2 from 4th Street to Reserve Street, the proposed improvements are continuing with the corridor branding and wayfinding signage and share lane markings up to Robbins Road. From that point, the segments turn into is part of the City of Boise jurisdiction all the way to Reserve Street. The design construction of the proposed improvements for the rest of the section will be in full coordination with the City of Boise.
Edinson, really quick, go back one slide. So that Fort Boise Learning Center, is that the theater?
That's the Longfellow.
No, oh, sorry, yeah, that's the other smaller gray box.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
And then we get from segment 3 from Reserve Street to Jefferson McKinley, where there's an existing path, an unpaved path that is shown as in the 2 images on the right. We are recommending the review of this connection as part of the design of the bikeway. In addition, as we connect to Jefferson Street and McKinley, we're recommending the installation of bulb out to increase visibility and reduce the crossing distance at this intersection. And for segment 4, from Bruce Avenue to Jefferson McKinley, from Jefferson McKinley to Warm Springs, we're continuing of the additional signage and branding towards this section, the share lane marking. We continue to highlight that traffic calming at that intersection McKinley. So this is a connection towards the current work that we're doing towards Bannock and Warm Springs that we're doing this year. In addition, I wanted to highlight that the additional consideration, we're highlighting a conversation we had with the East End Neighborhood Association, where they recommended this alignment, this route from Logan Street to Avenue H to Washington, because of the presence of cyclists, the high use of cyclists along the route. We did traffic counts, updated traffic counts to verify the LTS, and based on that recommendation and analysis, we're recommending for us to review it as part of this project or as part of the bikeway signage program, and looking into installing bikeway signage branding, wayfinding signage, and chair lane markings along this route. Finally, Commissioner, after looking at all these proposed improvements, the cost estimate for the Franklin Street neighborhood improvement is of $1.01 million.
Thank you, Ensign. Oh, sorry, it was a little too soon.
This is the last one. So as next steps, from today to June 28th, we're releasing the draft concept for public review. And finally, on June 28th, the staff will be back in front of the commission for adoption consideration. And with this, I'll conclude my presentation. I'll stand for any questions.
Thanks, Ensign. Commissioners. Commissioner Hanson.
So, I guess this kind of breaks down into segments that feels like there's three parts that are being put together and that they're quite distinct. That when we were discussing 8th Street, we talked a lot about the Franklin improvement needs on Franklin, but that's what you call segment 1. And there's some justification in sort of dealing with that separately, because this is all gridded, so heavily gridded. And so the reality is people's trips are taking multiple routes to get to certain things. And the value of that segment, for example, is, north of State Street, it's got to function basically as State Street's bike lane, because it's a couple blocks off of State, and it provides east-west connectivity that you don't get like on Washington. So there's rationale on that. And I would just say, with respect to that segment, I would say that the three places where it crosses a one-way street, that should be a raised intersection, because those three streets right now, 15th, 16th, and 9th, traffic just goes straight through. They don't, even a curb extension, I don't think will be sufficient unless it's a two-way street when people are already focused on the traffic coming at them. When they're on a one-way street, they don't bother to worry about traffic coming at them, so they're just less aware of what's going on. A one-way street tells the driver, your priority, just go as fast as you want to hit the lights and go on through. So I really, to the extent that as long as we have one-way streets, that should be a raised intersection so they're prepared for it. I don't know, it just bothers me that we would have then this interesting segment, that's segment B, which is basically the city of Boise's figuring out how to do bike connectivity in and around Fort Boise. So be a whole separate thing, because to the extent people are traveling east and west on Franklin and they want to go further east, they're not going to go up into Fort Boise and back down. They're going to go down to Bannock and cut across, and go down to the Greenbelt or go down to the Botanical Gardens or whatever. It just seems completely out of direction for that to be a road. So in and of itself, there's some value as people cut through to try and avoid those roundabouts and the busier traffic on 4th Street and Avenue B. They'll probably want to cut through and go through Fort Boise. So there's some value to that, not necessarily as part of the Franklin Street connection. That's a separate, it just feels completely separate. And then when you go into the East End neighborhood, then it's like, okay, now how do we connect here? And the priority from the neighborhood, from what I'm hearing from them, is east-west connectivity on Jefferson, McKinley, and Franklin, Washington. So that sort of north end as they're getting to downtown. People who live in Foothills East and on the east side. And then, of course, we're going to be improving Warm Springs. And that does have bike facilities, although they're not the safest. But we have a scoping that we're going to improve the bike facilities on Warm Springs. So there's some logic in making sure that all the connections. But again, you've got a gridded network. People are going to make their choice. They're going to use Springs to go east-west, or they're going to use a northern route to avoid having to go down, just like a driver would. They have lots of choices. So it seems that's in and of itself a third separate one that we would deal with. So at this point, I think we ought to be dealing with them in three separate projects and not as, one big one. And concentrate on that, because it's very, very different contexts. And that's just what I would, and I noticed there's someone here from the, East End Neighborhood Association, and maybe you can provide that. That's what I would do. I'm not ready to vote on this in a couple weeks, just because I think it just feels like we're trying to ratchet together three very separate things. That's my take on it. And I do ride through this area, so it's like, but I don't take that route.
Commissioner Goldthorpe.
Yes, not wanting to stir the pot or create a problem where none exist, but what have the neighborhood association, City of Boise, or others said about this particular plan?
President Pickering, Commissioner Goldthorpe, thank you for your question. So overall, when we presented to the North End, they gave us their feedback regarding some areas of concerns that we take a closer look. They recognize that this is a bicycle connection in the route. We presented during the meeting, they besides those specific areas, they didn't raise anything major from the corridor. They recognize that rather than going directly to Fort, we took a different route just to make sure that towards Washington, that way it continues to create that low stress. And then with the East End neighbors, certainly we had conversations regarding the benefits of their section, but also their other priorities, like the ones that was shown in the slide, which we wanted to be responsive in that sense and show it as part of an optional connection. One of the things that we discussed was that certainly this segment, it's just part of an overall regional network. It's just not just a portion, just one of the elements there. Through different projects, we might look at different segments, like the Franklin, McKinley, or those sorts. But this project connection as part of our low stress. That's one of the things that we wanted to let them know, and that's what we even as discussions were happening. The City of Boise and the school districts certainly recognize the benefit out of this connection, and has part of an overall and the key destinations that go along it, like several, at least 2 schools goes through this route, and also a bicycle Boise Park, it's part of the route. So certainly there's interest of seeing that those key destinations get connected to our overall bike network.
Appreciate that. I'll tell you the real reason I asked my question is I pray to God this doesn't turn into another situation like our 8th Street project where it lasts forever and things and problems and people come out of the wall. So the fact that you're listening and reaching out, and perhaps there'll be fewer objections to what we're doing. Thanks.
Commissioner Gold.
Thanks, Madam President. I just want to agree with Commissioner Hansen's comments about those intersections and the need for raised intersection or other traffic calming situation. And just wanted to ask if traffic circles, mini roundabouts have been considered as part of this project anywhere along the way?
So not specifically traffic circles because of the constraints within each of the intersections, especially in the grid system. It's a little bit more difficult because of, as it's already mostly developed, it's built out that section of downtown. So certainly it becomes a little bit of a challenge when talking about traffic circles on those sections, and especially with the signalized configuration that we have in downtown. That creates another conversation at that point. But we looked at an array of improvements along many of the segments, and just to make sure, and we weighed many of with the project team as well as we review the public comments as well.
Madam President, follow up. So when you're talking about the network being built out, are you mainly referring to right-of-way constraints for those?
For the Franklin section, yes.
Okay.
Ensign, I just want to say that I actually used to live on Avenue H when I first moved to Boise, and so I would take that pathway all the time to get to downtown. So I really appreciate the added emphasis of making that pathway a little bit more well-known, because it goes behind, you know, the fire department there, and so it kind of looks like it's not a publicly accessible pathway. So the more that we can do to increase that use through design and like the wayfinding signs like you've described is gonna be important, so, folks can use it more frequently. Okay, anything else?
I was just wondering, since East End has someone here, if you're prepared to speak to, the whole notion of if we could separate it out into 3 parts and move forward on 3 parts as one. I just finished working with East End Neighbor Association, sending all the priorities into our staff back in March on the integrated 5-year work plan, and this configuration wasn't part of that. So it's
And
like,
so-
it seems odd that we would be advocating for something that's not something that the neighborhood advocated for and that's now being considered as part of the integrated 5-year work plan.
Ensign, do you have anything else to add as related to your presentation?
No.
Okay, thank you.
not-
So Deanna, did you have some statements to share? Please state your name and address for the record.
Thank you. It's not testimony. Do you still need my
Oh,
name
true,
and address?
true, thank you.
I mean, I have to give it to you. So I'm here, on behalf of the East End Neighborhood Association Traffic, Transportation Committee, because John Crowley could not be here today, so just to clarify that. First wanted to thank Edison for coming and meeting with us about this. We are, generally very supportive of the Franklin Street low stress as part of the low stress network. We think it's an important connection. We were surprised. We didn't really, I don't know about the public outreach. We kind of learned about it kind of after the fact. So not a lot of comment came out of our neighborhood, which could have been on us. I don't know. But there wasn't anything directly reaching out to us so we could inform our neighbors. We always, like if there's a survey or something, we always send it out to our list so anybody who wants can comment. And so we didn't know much about it until the first quasi high level proposed design came out. And that's when we first commented on it and reached out to your staff. And I would comment on Jim's statement about through the 3 segments. It is true they're very different. However, our neighborhood always recognized going through Fort Boise and the VA as part of this. We need that. It's just not good, well connected. We're just not. It's just a real disconnect. And I do think that the route they've got defined, coming down to Washington and using the roundabout to get across Fort, getting across Fort is frankly quite dangerous. To me, that roundabout at 3rd is really the only, and then bringing them up through Robbins Road and over makes sense all the way to the fire station pathway, and improving the crossing on Reserve is exciting for us because that's something we've identified in multiple conversations and projects, including the recent Armory project. So up to that point, we're fine. I do think I didn't see anything through the park. I ride through there a lot. I use the VA and the park quite frequently. And there are currently really horrible old styled speed humps on that road that wiggles through the park. So you'd have to work with the city and Parks and Rec. I don't know if we want cushions and pillows with a split or something, but they're that really horrible, difficult, hard, if you were hauling a kid in a trailer or something, which I used to do, is kind of difficult. So that's something I would recommend for that section. Otherwise, I think that section's pretty low stress and clearly low volume. The only real concern we have, and the big surprise we had, was the Franklin Bikeways in our East End neighborhood bicycle pedestrian plan that we work with you all on. And the section that goes south isn't in our plan. We don't need that. We don't really understand why it's there. It doesn't serve our neighborhood. Now, if there's some sense that it serves people regionally, we're not opposed to it. However, we believe that for our riders and what we learned through our bike ped plan, and people further east, frankly, when we were involved with the low stress network plan, You know, people coming east, from the east, I've talked to riders, Southeast Boise, Barber Valley, Mesa, they're on the Greenbelt often if they're low-stress riders. And they're either staying on the Greenbelt or they're jumping off at either Penitentiary or Martin. And that's because at that point, the Greenbelt goes really far south. So if you're not going south, if you're going downtown or you're even maybe going north, you're going to the north end, you're jumping off there because, and you're riding through our neighborhood. And that's what we heard. And that's what we know is true of our riders as well. So that from what we think it should do is use that wonderful pathway along Fire Station because it's heavily used, and I would hope it gets widened. It's so crowded. I use that 2, 3, 4 times a week, and during, especially this time of year, a lot of dog walkers, lots going on there, and so it's pretty narrow. It needs to be widened. But at that point, we want the low-stress route, the Franklin Bikeway low-stress route, to turn onto Logan, go out to Avenue H, go down to turn right on Avenue H, and then come to the intersection of H, McKinley and Washington, and get on Washington. We're not recommending it go on Franklin, and early on in our bike ped plan, it was identified as Franklin and or Washington, because the Washington came from our neighbors throughout that process. Franklin's, at that point, is still McKinley, so the Jefferson, McKinley, Franklin, as you may all know, is pretty high speeds and a very unsafe corridor, which we want to work with you on. But Washington's low stress, it's what we heard repeatedly from riders, even from Foothills. They don't mind dropping down the extra because that's where you end up anyway, because McKinley's H we think is perfect, partly because of the armory coming in, Foothills access. We think that particular intersection would be perfect for, frankly, a 3-way stop. But that's a longer conversation. But today we could easily get people onto Washington, and Washington then gets you all the way to Costin, very near the 3 places people want to come into this from further east. You can either access the trail that takes you over to Corview or Eagle Rock Park. You can access Hillview, which gets you all the way over to Bacon, and some people take that. I've heard people come off at Old Penn and get on Louisa and get onto Bacon and come in that way. They get off Warm Springs as soon as possible. I know we're working on a concept study for Warm Springs. We don't know what that's going to look like. I think the Franklin low stress is going to, whatever we do to Warm Springs is never going to be as low stress as this. So getting people off of Warm Springs and across Warm Springs and out of the way of Warm Springs earlier than later, we think is better. So we think the bikeway needs to go as far east as possible. And this ending at, and then the last piece of this going south to Bruce, and then I'm not sure what they're going to do at Bruce. People aren't really trying to get to Warm Springs, and what we've heard, maybe they've done some research and they've learned otherwise. We really heard during our bike ped plan from our neighbors that they really would prefer the section from Logan down to F not be paved. It's a section along the canal. It's very narrow and constrained, and in order to pave that, you would have to pull out all the vegetation. And today, people appreciate it, a lot of dog walking in there. I think it would have to be really narrow. Maybe you can do 5 feet in there, I'm not even sure, but you'd have to lose all the vegetation. And we think allowing the cyclists to turn left on Logan and right on H means you don't have to pave that. And if you really want to connect people on the Franklin down to Warm Springs and maybe even cross Warm Springs at Strawn, you can do that at Avenue H because Strawn comes in very near to Avenue H. So our 2 concerns is we really want that alternate 3. The other is we're indifferent to it, I guess. It doesn't serve our neighborhood very, very well. And without the alternate 3, we don't have a Franklin bikeway. It's non-existent for most of our residents. And then not paving that section to us is what we heard from our neighbors is they really don't want that paved. So with that, thank you for your time.
No, thank you, Deanna. And yeah, that makes sense about Avenue H to me. But Commissioner Goldthorpe,
Yeah.
and before you go, I actually have to hop off and get to an urgent thing. So I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Hansen to chair the rest of the meeting.
Hey, the question that I have is, you know, we've got a hearing set for later in the month. And the question I have is actually directed to our staff. And that is with at least it seems to me, been some reasonable requests here for us to consider. And I'd like for those to be considered before we have a final adoption hearing.
Agree.
You know, I'm one of those once and done guys, so.
We have, Mr. Lucas is gonna come up.
He's one of my favorite question answerers.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Lucas.
President Hanson, members of the commission, thank you, Justin Lucas for the record, Deputy Director of Planning and Project Management. If the commission would like some more time to consider these items, we're glad to bring it back. I think we can delay the adoption. Rather than do it in June, let's maybe plan for the end of July. And that would give us a time to bring back a revised document in a work session format for the commission to review before we bring it back for adoption. In that revised document, we could make the modifications and contemplate some of the input that we received today, if that's amenable to the commission.
Yeah, you know, the only time in my life here in Treasure Valley that I ever walked a lot was when I lived on Avenue H. So I actually know what that area looks like.
Great.
Thanks.
And, well, if there's no objection, Commissioner Gold, so that would be great, and I think looking into exploring whether we proceed with this as one or as two. One may be at a point where we could move it further along, one portion, and another might require a little more work with the neighborhood. So just exploring that between now and then. I think that would be
Commissioners, we're glad to explore that. I think, you know, just to be honest, I mean, there's different ways to look at corridors. We try to take a comprehensive look. I think, Commissioner Hanson, one way we could address that is talk about, this is just a concept level. And when we move into the design phase, I think it does make some sense to break this up and look at different pieces and parts. And I think that's what would be a possible outcome of some of those conversations. And that way, when we get into the more detailed design phase, it gives us a chance to be more targeted with the specific neighborhoods. So I think we have some options there for sure.
great. And I know looking at, because there was a neighborhood request with respect to McKinley and Washington, integrating traffic calming in that, because that's where we do get, as once people come off the hill, they hit McKinley and boom. So the crossings at Avenue H and Avenue F are both opportunities for traffic calming along that corridor. And so incorporating McKinley somehow in a more integrated way may make sense, rather than doing that later, doing this segment with McKinley, a segment of McKinley as the neighborhood requested might make a whole lot of sense as well. Up to Jefferson. Thank you. Any more questions? I guess we're now on to our training. And thank you very much for coming. We have a mandatory training for commissioners, which I think Commissioner Gold has already gone through, so there's two of us. And
Mr. Vice President,
Commissioner Pickering and Commissioner McKinney not here, whether it might be wiser to have knock us off one off at a time.
We'll have to defer this training since you no longer have a quorum.
Yeah.
So we will reschedule.
We couldn't
Commissioner
convince
Gold,
Commissioner Gold to sit through
You
it
are
again.
excused with the Vice President's support, and you'll be excused from the next one also.
Thank you.
Thank you.
She's not arguing with me.
No. Thank you. All right, if that's the case, our work session is adjourned.